All right, hello, good morning, and or good day, and welcome to another edition of Digging Deeper. I am so glad to be with you as always, and some of you are getting into your life group semester more deeply, or getting into it as you begin this new semester. I realize some of you may not be starting for a few weeks still, but and you're probably maybe not be watching this video, but if you are meeting again, maybe you are using this video, and so I am glad to be your virtual life group facilitator for this time. And today we are delving into a new series, and so starting a new series here at Life Point, and so that's always exciting to do. And so we are going to be starting doing this series called "Don't Feed the Beast," and this first episode or the first message here in this series has gotten things rolling in here, and so we're going to talk about that and talking about emotions and the role of feelings in our lives and things of that nature. So to get started here, let's ask these first three questions that we always ask, and these are the questions that they seem like, why do we return to these so often, you might wonder. Well, the reason that we return to these questions so frequently is because they reinvigorate our minds, at least toward the message. They remind us of what the message was about, and they help us to focus in on that, because if you're like me, there's so many things going on in our lives that we just will often get distracted by, that we'll forget maybe by 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon what the message was about. So this is a way of reorienting us toward what we had heard. And so the first question is this: what did you like in the message? What did you like in the message? Was there something particularly meaningful to you that you really liked? And so take a moment, share that with the rest of your group. Maybe it's something they missed, and see what you all come up with. Pause the video right here and discuss that. Okay, second question. What did you disagree with in the message? What did you disagree with in the message? Maybe there was something in the message that you took issue with, or that maybe just wasn't clear to you. Well, if that's the case, take a moment, and I need you to try to talk about that, because there may be other people to your right or your left in the circle there that you're in who are able to answer that question or provide some clarity to you on that unclear aspect of the message. And so take a moment and answer the question: what did you disagree with in the message? Pause the video here and do that. All right, third question: what do you remember the most from the message? What do you remember the most from the message? Maybe there's something that is particularly memorable to you from the message. Maybe there was something that really stuck out to you from the message from Sunday. Share that with your group. Share that with the rest of your group. And it could have been the bottom line, but it could have been something else from the message. But share with them what is the most memorable thing to you from the message. Pause the video and discuss that. All right, well, let's get into these ice-breaking questions. We call them My Story, because there's no right or wrong to these. This is simply your opinion, your perception on these things. So everyone's an expert. If he or she is his own or her own expert on these. So what role would you say feelings play in your life? Let me ask that question again. What role would you say feelings play in your life? Pause the video, discuss that as a group right now. Well, everybody is a little bit different when it comes to feelings and how we engage with them. But I would say that for many of us, a great many of us, feelings can make or break our days, right? Depending on how we feel, how we even wake up feeling in the morning, that can determine the trajectory of our entire day. So if we wake up feeling good, then maybe we will have a mentally good day. But if we wake up feeling bad, and I don't mean physically bad, but emotionally bad, it can take us in a complete different direction. So really that's a huge determining factor. the way we engage with our feelings. So for some of us, that's a bigger role. For some of us, it's a smaller role. But I think in every one of our lives, feelings play a significant role. Second question, would you describe yourself as emotional or unemotional, and why? Second question here, would you describe yourself as emotional or unemotional, and why? Pause the video, take a moment, and discuss this as a group right now. See what you come up with. Would you describe yourself as emotional or unemotional? And then answer why. Well, every one of us is again going to come at this a little bit different, but some of us are more subject, I would say, to emotion than others, right? There's just some of us that are more emotional than other people, and sometimes that can just be dependent on a lot of circumstances going on in our lives, or even our chemical things going on in our bodies. All these things can impact how emotional we are, or how labile, I guess is the medical term, we are in our emotions. But some of us are more even keel, steady as she goes, just very very consistent in our emotions. But some of us are very up and down in our emotions, and I don't think there's a right or wrong to that. But just to point out that every one of us maybe is somewhere on that, or certainly is somewhere on that emotional continuum, and some of us are maybe more emotional than others. However, I would say this as well. Now, I guess maybe I should rephrase that. I guess we'd say we're all emotional, but the way that comes out is different, or the way those emotions fluctuate is more significant in some of us than others. And along with that, as far as we're talking about emotion and describing ourselves as emotional or unemotional, it's interesting that sometimes it may be that other people's perceptions of us are different than our own perceptions, right? We may think that we're not emotional, but other people may say, oh man, he is extremely emotional. And at the same time, maybe we think that we're way radically emotional, and find out that other people's perception is that we're not really that randomly emotional. And so it's sometimes our perceptions of our own emotions are not accurate. All right, well, let's go into the digging deeper segment of this, and we're going to look at Esther chapter 4, the whole chapter, Esther chapter 4, and I want to read that. Well, actually, I want you to read that. Take a moment and read that in your group, and appoint somebody to read that for you, and listen carefully to what happens in Esther chapter 4. Pause the video and take a moment to do that. All right, well, in Esther chapter 4, I don't know that I should, since you just read that, I don't know that I'll read it too. It seems like that would be double reading there maybe. But you notice that what happens in Esther chapter 4 is we pick up with this fellow named Mordecai, and he's in mourning right off the bat, and then he goes to his cousin who he's raising. Her name is Esther, and he ministers, he goes to her and he explains the gravity of the situation. Now, that is what we see here in this chapter. It says, that his people were being consigned to destruction, and we find out Mordecai was a Jew. I don't know that we see that here in this passage, but we find that out earlier. And then Mordecai, I'm going to read this last part because it's just so significant, as he comes to Esther, who is the queen, by the way, of this empire here in Persia. And it says, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape more than the other Jews. There we are. So, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go gather the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So you see this very dramatic scene here where Mordecai and his people, and by extension Esther and her people, are under the threat of extinction, or of genocide, we might say. And as a result, Mordecai goes to Esther, who is in a position to do something about this, and says, "Hey, Esther, you need to do something." Now, Esther says that there is this danger to this plan, and she says that in verse 11, "All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except for the one who the king holds out as a golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king for these 30 days. And so there's this danger, this hazard, this threat here. So what was the issue confronting the Jews in this chapter? What was the issue confronting the Jews in this chapter? And you see Esther chapter 3 for help on this, to figure out what's going on, to get the backstory to chapter 4. So pause the video, look back in chapter 3 as a group. Maybe you want to read the whole chapter and figure out what is the issue that is causing this problem that is confronting Mordecai, Esther, the Jewish people as a whole. So pause the video, discuss that as a group right now, and we will be back in a moment. Okay, well, Esther 3 gives us the background on what was going on in chapter 4. And so the issue confronting the Jews, I asked, well, what was the issue that was going on there? Well, so there was this fellow named Haman, who was an official in the court of Ahasuerus, who was the reigning monarch here in Persia at this time. And so King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and I'm reading in verse 1, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And so what you had then is, you might expect in an ancient monarchy like this, and where there's this clear pecking order and clear hierarchy of significant people, that people would show some kind of deference to Haman. They would show some kind of respect, and that's exactly what we see, because we read that the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had commanded concerning him. But the problem was Mordecai. Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Now, why? Why did he not bow down or pay homage? Well, that's a great question, and we don't have a definitive answer, but it could have been that he didn't want to be seen as contributing to idolatry, or being, not that you couldn't bow down to an earthly ruler without being idolatrous, but maybe that was in the back of his mind, that might create some confusion. Maybe some Bible scholars have suggested that Haman was a descendant of King Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites, and it could possibly be that they thought about King Agag and thought, well, this king is not the, or excuse me, this king was against Israel. He was in rebellion to Israel. In fact, Samuel put him to death. And the Amalekites were always trying to bring about the destruction of the Jews. And so it could have been that Mordecai had an understanding of this background of Haman and who his people were and where he had come from. Or it could have just been that Mordecai believed that this would be some way setting a bad example or demonstrating allegiance to someone beside God. We just really don't know what his specific reasoning was for not bowing down or paying homage to Haman. But whatever the case was, it ticked Haman off big time. And so Haman is very upset. And as a result of him being upset and seeing and noticing that Mordecai did not bow down in reverence to him, you see Haman coming to the king and saying to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad." This is verse 8. "Scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples of all the provinces of the kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every kingdom, other people, and they do not keep the king's laws. So it is not the king's profit to tolerate them." Now, there's a very jaded perspective on the Jews, obviously, with some inaccuracies there. "But if it please the king," he says, "let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver," which is an enormous amount of money, "into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, so that they may put it in the king's treasuries." So basically, he wants to exterminate these Jews, not just Mordecai, but all the Jews, because of Mordecai being unwilling to bow down to him. And I guess he extended that to the attributes of Mordecai's people. And so this is what was going on here. Okay, so next question, number 3, what was the danger of Esther involving herself in this situation? And there was a very real danger, and we've touched on this, but what was the danger of Esther involving herself in this situation? Pause the video, discuss this as a group, and try to figure it out. Why, maybe the why behind the what. Maybe you can see the what, but why was this such a concern? What was going on here? So pause the video, see what you come up with. Well, there was very real danger for Esther to come before King Ahasuerus. Now, this is where we have to kind of delve into the culture a little bit, because this just doesn't seem like it computes to us. In fact, now you're going to have to fact check me on this, because I could be cuckoo, but I believe that there has been a movie called The King and I, more recently, I think there was even a movie called The Prince of, I don't remember. There was a movie not too long ago that was marketed even for Christian audiences, maybe 10 years ago, I can't remember, about the Book of Esther. And there were all these romantic scenes, and it was a very touching relationship story. Well, I think all that is inaccurate, okay? And I'm going to tell you why. Because Esther did not live a charmed life. Esther did not have an easy life at all. She was the queen of a pagan king who regarded her as a piece of his property. She was not to go before the king. Now, we read this in chapter 4, if you recall. In chapter 4, where Esther is responding to Mordecai and saying, there's but one law to be put to death. That was in verse 4:11, except to the one who the king holds out the golden scepter. And she had not been summoned. So yes, this was her husband. Yes, she was the queen. But nevertheless, it didn't matter if she was the queen. If she showed up in the court, the royal court, without being summoned before the king, he could put her to death. And apparently she thought that was a credible threat. So that tells you something about what kind of man Ahasuerus was. And so she was not to go before the king unless she was summoned. So she was truly putting herself at peril in going before this pagan king. Even though it was her husband, even though she was the queen in the kingdom, it did not matter. He was apparently a very severe man, and he was willing to even put the queen to death, and she believed that he quite possibly would. And so there was this danger of involving Esther in this situation. It was credible and it was meaningful, because we don't understand such a thing. It doesn't make sense to us. But in this culture at this time, it was a very different situation. And women, especially in this kind of context, were valued or not valued in a much different way. And so it was a rough and tumble place. And especially, this was not even a Jewish culture where women were regarded and were respected. But here in a pagan culture, this was not. In fact, if you want to look back even farther in the book of Esther, what happened was Ahasuerus' former queen named Vashti was deposed because she wouldn't when we don't know all the details, but apparently wouldn't come out and display herself before a bunch of drunken nobles. And so Ahasuerus just said, well, you're no longer queen, and decided that he was going to have a beauty pageant, basically, and that's how he found Esther. So Esther was in real danger here. Next question, how might have Esther's feelings conflicted with what she needed to do? So how might have Esther's feelings conflicted with what she needed to do? Pause the video and see what you come up with. Well, Esther's feelings, she had to have some very strong emotions about this whole thing. I mean, fear would be a big one, right? Mordecai says, well, you need to go before the king and make this plea for your people and try to get your people rescued. And Esther, I mean, we don't always often put ourselves at peril. Maybe some of us have in military context if we served in the U.S. military in a time of combat where our lives were imperiled. But this was literally a person who was putting herself in danger of imminent death. And so if you could imagine doing that, willingly, choosing to do this, that would be a very terrifying thing for anyone, I believe. And we sometimes romanticize this, and we sometimes think about, how brave she was and how brave we might be, but she was human, right? And she knew that she could very well be killed for what she was doing in this event. And so her feelings would have been involved a lot of fear, trepidation, apprehension about making this decision and doing this. And of course, she asked Mordecai and the Jews to fast for her. But nevertheless, this was a terrifying prospect, and she knew it. But she went ahead and did the obedient thing, the right thing, to honor God in this situation. Okay, last question. How does value, and this is more of a little applicational question, this delves into ourselves, but how does valuing what God has said over what we feel require faith? Okay, let me ask that again. How does valuing what God has said over what we feel require faith? Pause the video, take a moment and see what you come up with. Well, we have to believe, I think God's will is best to do what He wants. Let me say that again. We have to believe that God's will is best to do what He wants. If we don't believe that God's will is best, it is highly unlikely that we're going to do what He wants. We have to get that settled in our mind that God knows best, that He wants the best for us, and that as a consequence, we will obey. We will obey no matter what, no matter how we feel. I think about way back in that first interaction where Adam and Eve confronted evil and the moral choice for the first time, and where the serpent talked to them and said, questioned what God had said and said, God is keeping you from this tree because He knows that if you eat of it, then you'll be like Him, knowing good and evil. He's really trying to keep something good from you, is what the serpent tried to convince Adam and Eve about. And so that was not true. It was a lie. But we still fall for the same thing. We believe that God has not got our best interests in mind. And as a result of believing that foolish lie, we end up going our own way, doing our own thing, and hurting ourselves terribly because of it. And so I think it's really important for us to come to terms with the fact that God's way is best, and that our feelings about the matter don't really make the issue, or don't really determine the issue. The issue is, are His ways best? Well, if they are, then we need to obey unquestionably and unquestioningly, and do that, do what He has said, and recognize that whatever the consequences are of that decision of ours, that it is best. Well, I hope that was a help. I hope that gives us some food for thought. We got to look at a story we don't always get to look at in Esther, story I love very much. And spoiler alert there at the end of the book of Esther, we find that God uses Esther to deliver his people and bring them to a state of safety and protection, even turning the table so that the enemies of the Jews were vanquished. Now, I'll add one more thing, and this is something that may provoke you to read through the book of Esther. Esther is a unique book because it does not mention God anywhere. And you might say, "Oh, I don't believe that. I can't believe this book of the Bible doesn't mention God." Well, take me up on it and read through the book of Esther and see if it does. It mentions fasting, but not God. However, I will also challenge you to note that God's fingerprints are evident throughout the book of Esther. All right, well, let's pray and finish our time. Father, thank you for this time together. Thank you for these folks that have been able to journey through this story of Esther with me. I pray that you would remind us of who you are, that in those times when our feelings are trying to run the show, that we would decide that your will is best, that we want to follow you and be courageous to obey you even when it's not easy, because your way is best. And thank you that Esther made that decision. Thank you that because of that, you preserved the Jews, and as a result of that, your son was born from the nation of Jews. And Father, that we have a Messiah, that we have a Savior. Thank you for this time together. Thank you for your word. Help us to obey no matter what. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, you have a great week, and we will look forward to seeing you again next time for another edition of Digging Deeper. Bye-bye.